Well, good morning from a very chilly and very dark London, because we're here at the Science Museum and we are going to be having a look around one of the hidden gems of aviation collections. Well, hidden gems, really, it's a bit tricky, because up there on the top floor is one of the great collections of British aircraft in the country and important aircraft in the world. And we're going to be spending a few hours here before the museum opens having a look around. So, welcome to the Science Museum in South Kensington. Welcome to the Aviation Show, brought to you in association with the Pima Air and Space Museum. Doug, thank you so much for coming in nice and early to show us around. What is your title here at the Science Museum?
Well, the title's a bit mysterious. It's Deputy Keeper Technologies and Engineering, but at heart I'm a curator and have a few collections to look after. The main one is space technology, but I also look after the aeronautics collections. We have 3 of them.
Because I think it's important to say, for visitors come to the Science Museum, the aerospace bits are sort of in different places around the museum, aren't they?
They are, yes. I mean, the main aircraft display is here on the 3rd floor.
It's my favourite bit.
Very nice, yeah. But we have a few aircraft down on the ground floor in a gallery called Making the Modern World. Those are particularly significant aircraft as well. And we have one new addition in that same gallery, which is the world speed record holder for an electric aircraft.
Which is the Rolls-Royce.
We didn't have room to put it here, basically.
No, it's a bit busy up here, which is why I love it as much as I do. But there we go. So, I suppose, how did you get into, because whenever I talk to a curator, it's always fun, how did they get into it? Was this a goal, or did you stumble and fall into it?
No, it wasn't planned, no. It was an advert my mother spotted a long time ago, 40 years ago, and that was a job in the education department, the lecture service, stuff like that. And then over the years I moved into the proper curatorial department, and since the mid-90s I've been working mainly with the space collection, space technology. Because
it's quite a collection as well, because you've got V2, you've got the Apollo 10 capsule downstairs. There's quite a bunch of fun space bits here, aren't there?
There are some great ones, yes, and we have big plans for the future. But there is a new display, including some of those objects down on the ground floor, but at the far end of the museum we've moved the main display. Also got Tim Peake spacecraft.
Super. Well, we're not here to talk about those bits today.
No.
We'll have to come back for that, because we're up on the top floor in, I have to say this is one of my favourite collections of all the museums we've been around, mainly because if you're up in town, you can just sort of pop in, pop up and do it. But the Flight Gallery has been here for a long time now. So what's the story of the gallery itself? And then we'll sort of go through and talk about the story that you guys tell us.
Yeah, we can go for a wander. I mean, this structure, which as you can see echoes the design of an aircraft hangar, was very innovatory, 1963. So it opened originally in 1963, then it was called the Aeronautics Gallery. And then in 1993, it was turned into the gallery called Flight, which is the name we still have. And then in 2023, not so long ago, because the 1993 version was literally starting to wear out. You know, the panels were being, a bit flaky and what have you, lighting was poor, and the interpretation needed to move on as well.
Yes.
We did it all over again. No, we didn't touch any of the objects with one exception. It was just redoing the lighting, the panels, the labels, everything like that. But it continues to be a very popular gallery, not least because of its design and, of course, the aircraft in it.
Yes, we're going to get to those in a minute, because you have 2 of my favourite ones down at the far end. Okay. We'll save those. So, when someone visits the Science Museum here in South Kensington in lovely West London, what is the story you take people on as they arrive in the gallery with the new 2023 interpretation?
Well, we haven't moved that far from the 1963 version. It is a wander, as we will be doing, essentially through the 20th century. Okay. So we're standing under a replica of the Wright Flyer. So that was the very first powered aircraft to fly anywhere in the US in 1903 by the Wright brothers. This is a replica made under the supervision of one of those Wright brothers.
Oh, fab.
But then we move through and we end up in the jet age, which we're kind of still in, we're talking about all sorts of improvements, new fuels, things like that. But at the moment, we're kind of on a plateau, which started in the late 1960s.
Yeah. Super. Shall we start our wander?
Let's wander.
Super. So what's the first bit in here? Because I think when someone walks in, the first thing they're going to be dominated by is the fantastic engine collection, isn't it?
Well, yeah, you can't miss these engines, and this is the greatest collection of aero engines in the world. And there are more. These aren't all of them. We've got some of them in store, but we moved from the very beginnings of the 20th century with engines called rotary, and then we moved. That was when the cylinders, you can see some of the cylinders sticking out, and they actually spun round. You can see some of the old movie footage and what have you. Then you move into something called radial, where the cylinders didn't spin round, but just the propeller, and then we start moving towards the jet age eventually, and we have the first jet aircraft to fly in this country, which we'll come to later on.
Yes, which a lot of people think is the first jet aircraft to fly, and of course I can immediately see the comments to this video going, no, that was the Heinkel. And
well,
yeah, you start getting
it's an ongoing discussion, and it depends how you frame your question. But certainly Frank Whittle, he was a pioneer.
Yes.
You know, he was pioneering the concept of jet propulsion very early on, and the aircraft we have and the engine which he designed, they're both in the gallery.
Super. Okay, well, let's start looking at some of the aircraft then. So as we come in, what are we seeing as we start looking above us?
Well, I'll pick out two.
Okay.
With all of these sort of doped linen wings, it all gets a little bit confusing, but that is a single aircraft there with three sets of wings, so that's a triplane, and that is the first aircraft to be flown by a British person in the country, ever, okay? And the gentleman was Elliot Verdon Roe, shortened to AV Roe, which was subsequently shortened to Avro, the famous aeronautical company. Built the Lancaster bomber and things like that.
And so many things after that. Yeah. So that is
so
his
that flew on Walthamstow Marshes, yeah, in 1909. I see. And next to it, we can see lighter wings, a biplane, so just two sets of wings, and it's actually the Cody plane number 5. So Commander Cody was a very interesting character, well worth investigating further. But he was the first person to fly a powered aircraft in the country in 1908, I think. Some might need to read the label, but it's very early on. But he was an American. He was an American innovator, bit of an entrepreneur. Started flying kites, bigger and bigger kites for the army, for observation. Back in the Boer War, this goes back a long way.
Yes, yeah.
And he gradually started moving towards powered aircraft. So the first powered aircraft to fly in this country was a Cody flyer.
So, first British
piloted, yeah.
piloted, and then we've got Cody taking it on a bit.
Not the very first, that no longer exists. Yeah. This is a Cody 5. So it was Cody 1, which was the first one to do it. And it was down at Farnborough, where the air show is.
And still much innovation going on.
Oh yeah, yes. I mean, Farnborough was long for, as you go through the 20th century, that was the heart of British aviation research. And it started to change in the 1980s, 1990s, but there's still an awful lot of very clever thinking going on there.
Fantastic. So, I'm looking right above us. Is that a Blériot?
That's a Blériot, yes, yeah. I mean, you just fall over all these famous names. We've only just started. I can just see, we might need to move around a little bit. This is quite a nice view. We should say Blériot, the first person to fly the English Channel.
Yes.
Yeah. We don't have that plane, but we have one that was still one of his. It's essentially a very similar design. We've got a nice view here if we look further down the gallery and towards a green plane, AAAH. That was the Gypsy Moth that Amy Johnson flew, 1930, from London to Australia, the first woman ever to do that.
Yes.
Not all at once, you know, she had a few stops along the way.
A few stops, a few crashes.
That's right,
Yeah.
yes. So that was, and that has been in the museum pretty much ever since, you know, she got back to the UK.
Yes, Jason is an absolutely fabulous little aircraft, isn't she? And
Lurking beneath
yes.
a rather large aircraft, which is, well, hugely significant. It's the Vickers Vimy. It's a converted bomber from the First World War, and in 1919, John Alcock and Arthur Whittam Brown flew it across the Atlantic. This actual aircraft is the first one to fly the Atlantic. It's a terrific story. My colleague David has written a book about it. He knows all of the fine details. It was a real adventure story.
Yes.
They were planning it to be nice and smooth, June, nice weather. No. So they were nearly killed, essentially.
Oh, yes.
But that came down in islands. It came down in marshy ground. It was surrounded by people. It eventually made its way back to near Weybridge, and it was put back together again. So I suspect not all of the original one is here, but most of it is.
I'm pretty sure people took a few souvenirs.
They did.
Off of it, yeah.
They did, yes.
And we will be chatting to David in, oh goodness, about half an hour, specifically about the Vimy.
Yeah, it's a great story. Great story.
Oh, it's
yes.
fantastic. Yeah.
Yes.
Jack and Ted. It's quite.
I mentioned earlier on about the one object change we made
Yes.
in 2023, and it's that little chap down there. Might need to get a bit closer as it's rather dark.
Because I've not seen this yet.
So we were talking to our deputy director when planning the 2023 changes, and it was clear that we weren't going to take away any objects, weren't going to add any objects, but the Science Museum Group's collection still does have, a mascot that was flown by Alcock and Brown on the Vickers Vimy when they crossed the Atlantic. So clearly this chap, who's called Little Jim, or Lucky Jim, brought them luck. Now he's spent most of his life since then in Manchester, but our deputy director quite rightly said, well, why don't we put Lucky Jim on display? And actually what we have done is use Lucky Jim as a motif, and particularly to engage with the younger visitors, because the previous version of this gallery, it was a little bit highbrow.
Yeah.
It was all good stuff, but it wasn't going to say much to the kids. So Lucky Jim pops up all around the gallery and has been a great success. So
Fantastic.
Thank you, Lucky Jim.
I've known it was here, and I hadn't seen Lucky Jim.
There is another mascot at the RAF Museum called Twinkle Toes,
which is Jack Alcock's.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Super.
Yes.
So while we're here, I do have an important question to ask. You said that when you did the sort of rejig in 2023, you didn't bring anything else in other than that. But I guess a big question everyone always has is the conservation, restoration side of it. And I know we'll get to the S6B in a second, but she's been conserved. The Vimy, as you can see, is conserved as well. For the Science Museum, where does that line come in? Because there will come a point where all of these fantastic aircraft, 107 years old, the Vimy and things like that, at what point does conservation have to move into some of the more heavier work?
Conservation is kind of the all-encompassing term. So we don't do restoration as such unless there's a special case, I don't know. So it's a question of preserving if you like, as best we can. Usually in their, how they arrived at the museum, unless there is a good reason to perhaps, revisit the paint. Then, the Air and Space Museum in Washington has done that with its V2 rocket, and they've actually stripped off the the outer paint coat, which had been on public display for a long time and gone back to the original that was underneath. But we, as a rule, we haven't been doing that. It takes enough time, given the size of the museum, just to focus on conserving as best we can. So you can see here, these are some very fragile, doped linen wings, and they need attention. These have been on public display. We're on the top floor of the museum. The temperature sort of varies.
Fluctuates quite a bit.
Yeah, so the best we can do is to keep things as stable as possible.
Okay, can we go look at my favourite airplane?
Yes.
And not because of its association with Mitchell and the Spitfire, just because it's the last of the S series, and you've also got the Schneider trophy that it won.
It's your favourite, yeah.
I adore it.
It's a very good choice.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is 1931. This won for the third time a speed record, and it was for something called the Schneider Trophy. And these races, there were a lot of races going on back in the early days of aviation, very often sponsored by newspapers like the Daily Mail. And because this particular seaplane, the S6B as you say, won the race 3 years in a row, it got to keep the trophy, which we can just see over there, the Schneider Trophy.
We have to go over and have a look at, because if you're going to win a trophy, you want something that big.
You want something that's going to be noticed, which is an achievement in its own right. However, it's more to do with the designer and its association with aircraft designs that were to follow about, only a few years later.
Yes, it would probably be reductive to say that this directly leads to the Spitfire, which you have behind it. But a lot of the learnings that were on the S series went into that, especially wing and cooling on it. But just on that conserving thing, I love that she's in her original paint that is showing the age from
the pattern of age.
Yes.
Yes.
And it just looks wonderful.
We need to mention the name of the gentleman, so it's R.J. Mitchell, which, and we have
he gets enough press.
He gets enough press. We have a rather original statue of R.J. Mitchell over there, made out of Welsh slate.
Oh, lovely.
Which is not it's not something the Science Museum tends to do. But it was available and it was put on display about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, something like that.
Fabulous designer. As much as I adore this, and the Spitfire is wonderful, I love a walrus.
Right.
I think the walrus and the seagull that came after it. There's stories with Air Sea Rescue.
There's too many.
Yes.
There's so many to choose from. When Spitfire comes up in a conversation, particularly if we're on gallery here, I tend to veer towards the Hurricane, which I think doesn't get the recognition it should.
You're a man after my own heart as a Hawker fan.
The Spitfire, a wonderful aircraft. It was so fast, manoeuvrable, a pilot's favourite. But if we're talking about the Battle of Britain, the Hurricane was as important, perhaps more important, because of the punishment it could take. And if you were damaged but were able to put down, you could be repaired, but a Spitfire you couldn't really, not quickly.
We'll have a quick look at those notes.
The Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona is home to one of the largest non-government funded aviation and space museums in the world. Featuring nearly 400 aircraft, the museum is home to an incredible collection, like NASA's NB-52 X-15 dropship and 747 SP Sophia Airborne Observatory, to a wealth of rare military types from air forces all around the world, to the first production 777 and the second prototype 787 Dreamliner. Whether you're a military or civilian aviation geek, there will be an incredible aircraft around every corner of this epic 80-acre site for you to explore. As the Aviation Show's partnership with the Pima Air and Space Museum enters its third year, we're delighted to say that Pima is truly a top of your bucket list museum to visit. And it keeps getting better because the Philippine Mars is now on display, and right across the car park, the Tucson Military Vehicle Museum's doors are wide open to welcome you in to check out an amazing collection of tanks, armored fighting vehicles, and other vehicles, if you get fed up with all the airplanes. To find out more about the incredible collection and the fantastic events coming up at the Pima Air and Space Museum, and of course the Tucson Military Vehicle Museum, head over to www.pimaair.org to plan your trip to one of the world's great aviation collections, and one that now includes tanks next door, if that's your sort of thing.
I'm intrigued at this aircraft right above our heads here,
yes.
which is, you would say, an early Delta.
Yeah.
A very swept wing, maybe not a full Delta, but
Yeah. I mean, I continue to be astonished at how early some of the now fairly familiar concepts are. So we tend to think of swept wings, World War II onwards, but actually you can go back, earlier than that.
Okay, let's go over here towards your Spitfire and Hurricane, because I suppose we have to, really. And I guess these two are probably what a lot of visitors want to see, just because of what they stand for in the great pantheon of British aircraft. And I suppose we wander around this way. But you do get to get nice and up and close to the three great aircraft.
Hurricanes are in very short supply now, particularly ones that saw active service, as that one did, our one over there, both in World War II. But you can see Spitfires in other collections. These came to the museum not long after the war, as the various government departments were disposing of, surplus, redundant wartime equipment, including aircraft. So if we were starting the gallery again today, there's an interesting question as to whether we would have both or either of these aircraft on display, because you can see them elsewhere.
Okay.
What the Science Museum's flight gallery is mainly civilian, but also dipping its toe into research and development. This is a nice example of how that applies. So this is, as you can obviously recognise, this is an early version of the Harrier jump jet, the VTOL vertical takeoff. It's called the P1127. The reason we have it on loan from the RAF Museum is because this was towards the end of the research and development phase. And that's what the Science Museum is about. It's about researching, whether it's science or technology. RAF Museum, if you want to see the full panoply of aviation that the RAF was involved with, that's the place to go, or up at Cosford. But that's where this is, and most of this is civilian. So a new gallery, would we have Spitfire and Hurricane? Don't know, but that's one of the interesting discussions that goes into a new gallery.
That is fascinating, because I hadn't thought about that element of it being research and civilian, because in your head you think flight gallery in England, Britain, shall we say, those two would be sort of top of everybody's list, but you'd say you'd probably want to change it up, use the space for something else.
The museum work, putting a gallery together is highly contingent, and most of the contingency is hidden. You never see it. This is what we see here is the tip of an iceberg. So, for example, these were made available, as I said, back whenever it was. I think it was the late 40s, early 50s. We weren't able to display them until this gallery was built in 1963. Which was still within living memory. So everyone who went through the awfulness of World War II, could identify, particularly with these aircraft. There's a question also of what could be brought into the gallery, and you haven't asked the question yet of how we did that.
Yes, because we're at the right end of it, because we can kind of see all the big stuff now. How did they? Because we're a long way up in the museum, and you wouldn't have been able to bring them through.
We're on the third floor. We didn't interfere with the roof at all, as most people think. Either side of the gallery there are windows. So we took the windows out, and we had extremely large cranes between us, Science Museum, and Imperial College, and all the aircraft, either, the smaller ones intact, but so the S6B, that came in as it is, just through the window. The larger aircraft take the wings off, things like that. So yeah, they came in, and the reason there are no immediate plans to do a new gallery, we always like new galleries, you know, is because it would be an immense logistical challenge to actually get aircraft out and back in. In other words, it would be extremely costly. So until we have a fully funded project, this gallery will continue to look very much as it does now.
Because you do have quite a bit in the reserve collection as well, haven't you?
We do. We have a small airliner here. This is the biggest airliner we could get into the gallery, but we have the big supersized airliners in store down at the Science Innovation Park. So we have, what do we have? We have a Trident, which was the short haul sort of workhorse for BEA, British European Airways, back in the day. We have a Constellation,
Lovely
the only Constellation in the country. We have...
My dear wife, who's holding a camera, loves a Constellation.
Yes, American, but the idea was to actually develop a kind of sister museum to the National Railway Museum, which is part of the Science Museum Group family. That's at York, down just outside Swindon. So you'd have a road and aircraft centre, because the then curator, John Bagley, ex-Farnborough, swept wings, knew his stuff. He couldn't believe his luck when the museum acquired an airfield. He was no longer constrained by what would fit into this gallery. So he started to fly airliners and a few other aircraft in. We got one of the oldest DC-3s in the world. We've got the oldest airliner in the country, de Havilland Dragon. So yeah, we've got more that we can put on display here.
Well, let's talk about what is on display there, because we've got the Gloster just up on the top, which
yes,
I think...
Oh, that's a lovely shot there, actually. It's a shame they never really came up with a snappy title. That's the Gloster E38-39, and that's the first jet to fly in the UK, powered by a Whittle W1 engine, which is over there amongst the engine displays. Essentially, when we suspend aircraft, we remove the engines because they're so heavy. So yeah, that is another first as regards the history of aviation.
So if we go up the stairs, because there's the auto gyro we have to see, which is wonderful, and I shall keep an eye on Wendy as she manages the stairs and films. I get her to do all the stunt work, you see.
I don't come up here often.
Because when you come up to this bit, you do get such a great look at...
Yes, it does provide a nice view of some items which have a direct relationship to space technology, which we can come to in a minute.
So I'm just going to keep staring at the S6 unless we're 6B, I should say. I think the 6 is down at Southampton, isn't it? But there we go. So this is where we get to the jets, but then we also get rockets as well, because you have ME-163 up there, Doodlebug. So we've sort of start coming into that part where we get into your main area of space, as we start getting the ability to break through stuff.
As we know, Germany in the lead up and during the war were innovating like anything. So one of the challenges was to how best to intercept the Allied bomber forces who were coming over. So the Americans during the day, the Brits during the night. So this aircraft here, as you say, the Messerschmitt 163, commonly known as the Comet, K-O-M-E-T, was a rocket-powered plane which took off and started to ascend vertically. The acceleration was massive, as you might imagine, and the pilot had only a few seconds to target I don't know, a flying fortress or what have you, before he actually shot past the aircraft. Incredibly dangerous to fly, it killed a lot of German pilots, but the engine type, which was made by the Walter company, a lot of that technology was brought over to the UK after the war, and the engine was worked on, the engine type was worked on. It used a supply of oxygen called hydrogen peroxide, a very concentrated version, which is inherently unstable and tends to explode if any impurity gets into it.
And melts the pilots if it bursts into the cockpit.
It's just very dangerous. But you could store it. That's the thing. It was very useful, and the engine type, once over here, it was worked on and was used, a variant used to propel the rocket that put a satellite in space for this country, for the one and only time until maybe something happens before long.
Yeah, let's hope so.
So
I'm just very aware that we've only got you for a few more minutes.
Yeah.
But we want to head down here because we've sort of hinted on vertical flight over there with the
Pima 127. Yeah.
Yes, I never remember the numbers on that one. But we've
Harrier prototype.
Yeah, so it's the one just before the Kestrel, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. But then we have helicopters and, of course, the autogyro, which is a mad, wonderful concoction, really. And it's sort of that sort of full circle element of just getting flying, speed of sound, but plus vertical flight as well. So we're sort of looking at all aspects of flight, really, in the round in the gallery.
Yes, yeah. And you know, as is clear, and we've already mentioned, despite the Science Museum's aeronautical collections focusing on the civilian, but also research and development, and a lot of that was for the military. It was the military that had the operational requirements, which meant they also experimented a lot. Hence, something like the autogyro.
And yeah, it's wild that this was looking at your wonderful new card, 1934, and it's just the most mad thing, and amazing when you see them doing their thing. Because of course is the top blade on this not powered? He says, thinking.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes,
so
yes.
You've got the radio on the front, and then that just moves and it gives us lift. Yeah, it's nuts.
So the engine.
I can never remember if it does or not.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So you've got the forward motion, and it's actually the aerodynamic design of the blades which enables them to turn, and thereby providing an element of lift. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, I think as we've come right round and we can get a lovely shot of Jason, we can probably let you get back to your day job, which is very kind. Right. If someone's coming to the museum for the first time from an aerospace perspective, let's get you pointing at the camera. What would be your highlights of the collection that you care for? Even the space stuff downstairs. We'll let you talk about those.
I mean, a common question is, what's your favourite object? Which is very difficult to answer because there's several.
It's a Sophie's Choice question.
We've as regards flight, we've touched on some of the really important ones here. I mean, the Vickers Vimy. That's transatlantic flight is now commonplace, taken for granted. But there was a time not that long ago when it had never been done. So that's particularly impressive. As I've said, Spitfire Hurricane, I tend to just remind people how important the Hurricane was. Harrier jump jet a long time ago when I used to make construction kits. The Harrier was was a favourite. So to be able to have a prototype display there. Space-wise, downstairs, well, the Apollo 10 command module has to be one, because that went around the moon in May 1969. But also British aspects as well. We don't have the whole Black Arrow rocket, which uses the derivative of the engine developed for the Comet. Messerschmitt 163. But we have part of the rocket, so that's a favourite. It was built on the Isle of Wight,
Yes.
which is rather lovely. It's a nice juxtaposition of NASA-type technology, but actually in Hampshire on the Isle of Wight. Favourite object in the museum? Well, it might be something entirely different, which is a small model, 2 cylinders, built by James Watt, which moved the efficiency of steam engines on by orders of magnitude, and pretty much everything we've talked about owes it to James Watt and how he made steam energy, engines more efficient.
You've just made all the train people very happy because they can now say,
well,
it all comes back to trains.
Well, yes, trains, but a colleague would be aghast if I didn't mention beam engines. So actually the foundation of the carbon age, which we are now trying to escape from, that was down to people like James Watt and that separate condenser model, which enabled steam to become more efficient, and the rest is history.
Fantastic. Doug, thank you so much for your time.
It's all right, pleasure.
And for showing us around the flight gallery here at the Science Museum.
Pleasure.
The Science Museum in South Kensington, London is open daily from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And for February half term, which runs from Saturday the 14th to Friday the 20th of February, the museum is opening early at 9 a.m. So book your tickets now at sciencemuseum.org.uk. And many thanks to Doug, Laura, Aggie and the rest of the team at the Science Museum for facilitating our visit. As you can see, we had a fantastic time. Our next video from the Science Museum is all about that Vickers Vimy, as David Rooney joins us to tell us all about Alcock and Brown's Big Hop. I'd like to say thanks to all of our fantastic supporters over on Patreon. If you head over to our Patreon page, you can join the fun from just £3 a month, plus a bit of VAT, get your name in these very credits, and get all the episodes ad-free and early as soon as I get the edit finished. The Aviation Show is hosted and produced by Matt Bone and is a Boney Abroad production.